In my mind, the early 1990s to late 1990s were the glory years for import sports cars. It was kind of like walking into a local diner. There were plenty of different options to choose from to satisfy just about any appetite. You had the 240SX, the 300ZX, the GTR, the Supra, the MR2, you had the NSX, the Integra, the Evo, the 3000 GT, the Eclipse, the RX-7. That's just to name a few. There were so many different options. But there was a bit of a shift at some point in time around the early 2000s where auto manufacturers decided they didn't want to make as many sports cars. Instead, they favored making more family sedans, economy cars, and the ever-prevalent SUV. These were indeed dark times, but there were little sprinklings of hope over the years. In 2009, there was a bit of a familiar name reintroduced into the market with the Nissan GTR. In 2016, the NSX came back, and in 2020, the A90 or Mark V generation of the Supra. Now, it has to be said that when I first saw this car back in 2020, I wasn't impressed. I was a little bit skeptical about it. I'd heard about the performance not being all that intoxicating. The body definitely wasn't what we were expecting, especially when you consider what the concept cars were looking like. There was no massive rear wing like you had on the Mark IV Supra. And I was very disappointed to find out that it was really just a BMW in a Komodo. But those first impressions turned out to be quite wrong, and the story changed over the years. Now, I think that the 2021 year of the Supra, is the one to buy. It's kind of the best bang for your buck. And in today's video, I'll take you through the exterior styling, the interior design, we'll talk about the specs, and I'll take it out for a first impressions road test to really get an understanding of if this car is deserving of its Supra badge. Start by talking about the exterior styling on the Supra, and it is good news. I think it's one of the few cars on the market today that looks good from just about every angle. I especially love the front and the back and the side profile. Pretty much everything to do with how this car looks. Headlights are not too small. That's a problem that a lot of manufacturers are falling into. They're making these unnecessarily small headlights. I don't know what sort of a look they're going for, but they are proportional on the Supra. They look very good, and the daytime running design on these lights is very nice as well. Most of the vents along the front of the car are functional, and I do have to say most because not all of them are. These little slots just under the headlights on either side, as well as the top portion of this main vent, are actually fake. They're there just for aesthetics. And as you look on the back side of the hood, looks like this little vent area. That doesn't serve a function either. It's just a piece of plastic. Onto the side profile of the Supra. Now, this one is the 3-liter version of the car, so it comes standard with 19-inch wheels. The 2-liter comes with 18-inch wheels. You've got your carbon fiber side mirrors on this car. Not sure if that's an optional extra or not, but this car does have the carbon fiber. And you'll notice this little body panel that's all part of the door, actually, and it kind of flexes outward to meet the wider rear fenders. And rather disappointingly, it has to be said, you have yet another fake vent there. But I mean, it is what it is. When we start talking about the price point on this car, you really can't nitpick details like that. Finally, the rear end of the Supra, and I'm actually going to start by talking about the roof. There's a little bit of a groove in the middle of the roof, so as air flows over the car, it's going to be directed down towards this integrated duckbill spoiler that's all built into the hatch. It's actually quite a nice design. I like how subtle it is, and it just gives the car a bit more of a sense that things were thought through, as opposed to just having a spoiler slapped on at the last minute. Taillights look very good on this car. They have a very importy style, and they trickle down into this body line, which yet again is a fake vent, but I don't mind it quite as much here because it frames the rear end of the car. You've got your Supra signature right there in the middle of the bumper. It's black on this car. If you happen to get a manual transmission, which they've started offering for 2023, this Supra badge would actually be red. Both of your exhaust pipes are functional, no funky shapes just for aesthetics here. And I absolutely love this racing-inspired rear tail light thing. So under hard braking, that's gonna flash, let everybody know that, well, you're under hard braking. But back to those exhaust pipes, let's go ahead and turn the car on and listen to that beautiful sounding turbocharged straight 6. down to the interior of the Supra, and there's really no other way of saying this, it's a BMW. In recent videos, I've reviewed the M5, the M4, including the brand new M2. So if you're interested in those cars, check out the channel or I'll link them down below. But this feels very familiar to those, except that it's a bit more of the older generation of BMW's interior. So the climate control, the infotainment screen, which is touchscreen, you can also control it with this wheel straight out of BMW, and you have some little mechanical buttons as well. It all works very well, and that's totally fine because you're really just getting a Toyota with a slightly more premium interior. In fact, everything in here is leather as far as I can see. This is leather, the seats, your center console. There's a tiny bit of plastic here, but it doesn't feel cheap, and you have a little bit more on the bottom of the doors, but it's very thick and robust. Driving position is great. Seats are very comfortable and supportive without feeling like couches. They still have a bit of side bolstering to squeeze you into them, which is nice. Paddle shifters feel nice and premium. Steering wheel reminds me a lot of the last generation BMW steering wheel. And very important in this car, I actually fit, which is not the case with a lot of sports cars. And I would credit probably a little bit of that to the bubble design I was talking about in the roof. It gives me just a little bit more headroom, but I have quite a lot actually, and I'm 6'2", so that's a great thing. We've got a little wireless charging pad there as well. Overall, interior of this car, nothing really to complain about. But I do want to mention, actually, before I forget, that this car has an 8.8-inch infotainment screen, which for 2020, which was the first year of the Supra, that was an optional extra. They all came with 6.5-inch infotainment screens. And that's not the only change that makes me think that the 2021 year is the one to buy. But to explain more on that, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the specs. Now, there is a reason why I decided to review this, the 2021, instead of a 2023. And honestly, the real reason is I couldn't get a 2023 for a video because they're all sold out and I couldn't get my hands on one, but I was very fortunate that a dealership that I've worked with in the past had this one. But while I was doing my reading on this car, I realized that most of the changes that the Supra has taken in this generation, most of the important ones at least, took place for this year, the 2021. Because when the car was released in 2020, it had a 3-liter turbocharged straight six that made 335 brake horsepower and 365 pound-feet of torque. And that's fine. But in 2021, they introduced another engine, the 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder, and they upped the power in the 3-liter to 382 brake horsepower and 368 pound-feet of torque. That's a pretty sizable power increase, and that's the same sort of performance that you could expect from a 2023 car. They haven't actually changed it, and there are no more powerful performance variants of this car. So if you buy a 2021, it's just as fast as a brand new one. Now, when this car was released, it was offered exclusively with an 8-speed ZF transmission borrowed from BMW. But in 2023, after much begging from the enthusiast community, Toyota is now offering a 6-speed manual version. If you really want a manual, you'll have to go for a 23. Now, as far as performance with the ZF transmission, which is faster than the manual, this will do 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds and onto a top speed of 155 miles per hour. If you go over to Porsche to get a Cayman, it's going to cost you more money, you're going to have less power, and this is going to be faster. And with BMW, if you wanted to opt in for something like the M2, it might have more power, but they're just as fast as the Supra, the same 0 to 60 time and the same electronically limited top speed. And really important detail here, the Supra is a lot cheaper than both of those other two cars. It has a starting MSRP of $53,600. Now, I won't go through all of the specs of the other two cars. I'll just flash up a comparison chart for you to see how the Supra compares to some of its competition. It isn't just straight line speed either. This new Supra is a track monster. It set a lap time at the Nürburgring of 7 minutes 52.17, making it faster than some pretty heavy hitter performance cars. Cars on that list are going to be like the 2009 Nissan GT-R, the 997 generation of the 911 Turbo, the last generation of the BMW M2 competition, and even a Ferrari F430 F1. all of those cars have more power, they're more expensive, they're serious performance cars, some of them even considered supercars, and this beat them all. It's really quite an impressive car, and it seems to be almost impossible to get this level of performance at this price point anywhere else. And now what I'd like to do is take it out for a real quick first impressions road test to see what this car is actually like to drive. So first impressions on the Supra. I actually grew up loving import sports cars. They were just a great value for performance thing that you could buy. It was a great time to grow up if you were a car enthusiast. It made it very easy to love cars when you had things like the NSX, the Supra, the RX-7, all names that are now ingrained into my soul. So even though I was a little bit apprehensive about the Supra coming back, I was also quite excited because I actually had a Toyota Supra. My first car that I bought with my own money, which I made that money by doing people's homework, was a Toyota Supra. It was a 1991 Mark III. It had white exterior and period blue cloth interior with an R154 5-speed manual transmission where the reverse gear worked sometimes, and a 7M GTE straight 6. So it was turbocharged, single turbo at the time. And that car was horrible, but I loved it. I loved everything about it. The few times that it worked. It actually broke down on me on the way home, and then the first time I was able to get it running after that, I crashed it, and then I drove it maybe a couple times more before inevitably selling the car. But those few moments that I was actually driving the car, it was amazing. Just listening to the turbo spooling, and then when you let off the throttle, the blow-off valve, just making that very distinct blow-off valve-y sound. It was a great car. And on my way to shooting this car, I thought about what my expectations should be, because you really have to tailor your expectations when you drive a car for the first time. And much like other enthusiasts, I wished that this car would drive like my old Supra, because that driving experience is what made the Supra special to me. But the reality is, no car will ever drive like the Supras of our youth, because you can't make cars like that anymore. So when you do drive these new cars, just because it says Supra doesn't mean it's going to drive like those old Supras. It's just not the way it works. So driving this car, I really have to look at it as its own car. It is still a Supra, but it's a new interpretation of the Toyota Supra. And I'm really glad that Toyota didn't fall into the same trap that Nissan and Acura did. And I'll explain what I mean. Because when Nissan brought back the GTR in 2009, they priced it around $70,000. And $70,000 adjusted for inflation to today's money is around $100 grand. $100,000 is a lot of money. It's not attainable. And Japanese sports cars, import sports cars, are supposed to be attainable performance, and Nissan made the GTR unattainable. Acura did a much worse job when they brought out the NSX, because it had a starting MSRP of $150,000. Toyota brought back the Supra, and they brought it back at a price point that you can actually buy, especially I think in a few years when many of them hit the used market and everything kind of levels out. Getting a Toyota Supra isn't going to be impossible. In fact, it's going to be a very real possibility for a lot of people, and that's what I think Acura and Nissan should have done. So I have to give top marks for Toyota for doing that. Also, bringing back the manual transmission. They didn't do it for the first few years, but now that it's coming back in 2023, I'm very excited to see what that car is going to drive like. And being an import sports car and it being turbocharged, looking back at some of the older Supras, you wanted the turbocharged car. It's not like some of these German sports cars where they used to be big, lumbering, naturally aspirated V8s. Supras were always turbocharged, and that's what you're gonna want, and it's nice that they're still turbocharged, and they sound quite good. So I'll go ahead and switch the car into sport mode. I was driving it in normal mode, which are the only two modes that this car has. And in normal mode, the paddle shifters are responsive enough. You know, I'm not gonna say that they're PDK levels of fast, but they get the job done. In sport mode, much more responsive, as you would expect, as is the throttle response. Very important for me because I have the mental age of a 6-year-old. Sport mode also makes the exhaust a bit more gurgly. Oof, the upshift gets just a tiny little snarl, kind of like a, I don't know, it's just a tiny little snarl. I don't really have a metaphor ready for that, but it sounds really good. And I like that you can hear the turbo spooling up. It has a bit of a whine to it, and it's really cool. Definitely not as loud as my 91 Supra, but then again, this car works, and that one didn't. So I'm kind of okay with that. Got a little bit of a straightaway here. We're not going to do anything too rambunctious, but open it up a tiny bit. Yeah, the car sounds great. Sounds really good. Power delivery, fantastic. Even though it's a turbocharged car, the power delivery is actually quite linear in nature, with very little to no turbo lag. In 5th gear, around 3,000 RPM, I put my foot down. There's the very slightest bit of turbo lag, and you completely forget about it when that surge of torque kicks in. So, is this worthy of the Supra name? I would say so. The performance is insane. It's attainable. It's a very good looking car, in my opinion. I think it's a great interpretation of a modern day Supra. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and a huge thank you to Mercedes-Benz of Ontario for loaning me this car. This is actually part of their pre-owned inventory right now. They have 2 Toyota Supras, both of them 2021 and pretty low mileage. So if you're in the market for a Supra, I'll leave links in the description below to their website, their social media, as well as the posting to their 2 Supras for you to be able to check them out. Otherwise, leave me a comment down below with your thoughts on the Supra. Do you think it's worthy of the Supra badge or not? Let us know. Like and subscribe to show your support for the channel. It means more than you could possibly know. And hit the bell icon so that you get notified anytime I make a post. But until the next video, thanks again for watching and take care.